What do I think about Jack the Ripper's DNA being found? Have I seen all the news articles blaming Aaron Kominski? Will I be giving up my theory that Degas could be the killer because of all this hard evidence in peer-reviewed journals?
You're right, I do have a few things to say about that.
Allow me to introduce Russell Stephen Edwards. He's the man that paid £5,200 for the shawl. He was able to pick it up for a steal when it didn't sell in the auction the first time around. After all, it had already been discredited. Edwards believes that this shawl once belonged to Catherine Eddowes, Jack the Ripper's fourth victim, despite the fact that according to Scotland Yard, it was not found at the scene. The family who sold the scarf at auction believed that it had been handed down from Amos, a member of Scotland Yard. So they say he took it from the scene to give to his wife. However, not only was Amos not on the scene that night, he didn't even work for the correct branch of Scotland Yard. Jack the Ripper found and killed Catherine Eddowes right after she had sobered up enough to leave the 19th century equivalent of the drunk tank on the way home from borrowing money from her daughter. She was very down on her luck, so why did she own a 7-foot Russian silk scarf? Further, in the 19th century, the average height of a man would have been 5'6", so why have a 7-foot scarf? That's a tablecloth. If you've ever tried to dry off one of your grandma's old towels, you'll know they made things smaller back then. So what about the peer-reviewed journal then, you might ask? It does exist. It's in the Journal of Forensic Science. And it was written by 2 previously well-thought-of PhDs. But if you visit this site now, you'll notice that there is a big orange banner across it. Following investigation by the publisher, this expression of concern has been agreed to, due to concerns raised by third parties after publication regarding conclusions drawn from mitochondrial DNA. See, mitochondrial DNA cannot be used to identify any single individual. Edwards argued in his book that you could use mitochondrial DNA because Edwards had a mutation that was incredibly rare, 314.1C, I think. But somehow Edwards made a mistake. This wasn't the mutation at all. It was actually 315.1C. Of course, Catherine Eddowes had 315.1C because something like 99.2% of all Europeans have 315.1C. Most of the concerns addressed in these letters to the editor were just about using mitochondrial DNA to identify suspects at all. So the journal publishers asked to see the data. The data has since been lost. This mitochondrial DNA that they sampled is apparently missing. And the PhDs who wrote this article have agreed to allow this expression of concern to be published right over their paper for people like me to view. You have to pay for their article, but you can read this for free. One of the authors in 2015 was forced to cancel an interview that he had scheduled because his university told him he was not allowed to talk about this. This is the kind of headline that can ruin an institution's reputation. So why is this dubious evidence still cropping up in news articles today? And well, one reason could be that Russell Edwards recently re-released Naming Jack the Ripper with new evidence. Namely that he has now used mitochondrial DNA to draw a portrait of Jack the Ripper. I'm sure that's also sound and reputable science. And maybe I'm just cynical, but it's also possible that another reason could be, remember how he bought that shawl for £5,200? That was in 2007. 8 years later, in 2015, it went up for auction again for £2.9 million, or $3.8 million. And while I was able to find tons of articles reporting on the auction's starting price, I was unable to find any record of what amount it had been sold for. And the item is still listed on the auction site. You can make an inquiry about it today. I did. So given that the first auction was timed with the release of the first book, maybe we're due for a second auction. So who is Jack the Ripper anyway? Well, Aaron Kominski remains a good suspect, even if I'll still be researching Degas. But the idea of taking DNA from a shawl that had been touched by countless hands over 150 years and was never found at the crime scene? That's just bad science.